We live in interesting times for the headlines. Hong Kong police end their siege of a university campus that became a battleground with pro-democracy protesters as activists vow to hold fresh rallies and strikes in the coming days. North Korea's leader Kim Jongun supervised Thursday's test of what it called a super-large multiple-launch rocket system. Protesters in smoke-covered Sydney kick off global demonstrations against climate change, with activists and school children picketing the headquarters of bushfire-ravaged Australia's ruling party. And the Iglesia Ni Cristo paid tribute to the OFWs in Thailand through an Aid to Humanity event. I'm Alma Angeles, wherever you're watching from around the world. Thank you very much for joining us. And now to the news. Hong Kong police on Friday ended their two-week siege of a university campus that became a battleground with pro-democracy protesters as activists vowed to hold fresh rallies and strikes in the coming days. Renewed calls to hit the streets came after Beijing and city leader Carrie Lam refused further political concessions despite a landslide victory for pro-democracy parties in local elections last weekend. Sunday's district council polls delivered a stinging rebuke to the financial hub's pro-Beijing establishment and undermined their argument that a silent majority were tired of the nearly 6 months of increasingly violent protests. They also ushered in a rare period of calm following weeks of spiraling unrest with no clashes or tear gas battles between protesters and police for more than a week. But the calm spell looks set to end as public anger grows once more over the lack of response to the election results by Beijing and Hong Kong's leaders. In China this week, state media has sought to downplay and discredit the weekend ballot, while Mrs. Lam, who boasts record low approval ratings, has acknowledged public dissatisfaction, but she ruled out further concessions.
Despite the social unrest, I wish to assure our Thai friends that Hong Kong's fundamentals, including our unique strengths under one country, two systems, our rule of law, and independent judiciary, remain strong. I and my government are listening to our people with a view to resolving some deep-seated problems in Hong Kong through dialogue. I have every confidence that Hong Kong can bounce back, as we always do.
But online forums used to organize the mass movement have filled with calls for a major rally on Sunday and a strike on Monday, targeting the morning commute. The calls raise the specter of a return to the kind of weekly political chaos that has battered Hong Kong for nearly 6 months and helped tip the city into recession. Hundreds of office workers held flash mob rallies during their Friday lunch break in multiple locations across the city, prompting the deployment of riot police, but the protesters dispersed peacefully.
Hong Kong's problem would be resolved by Hong Kong instead of some other people. But those constitutional rights which give Hong Kong this very unique advantage will remain, and will of course have every interest to uphold these principles. And irrespective of what political belief or stance that people are taking, there's no reason to resort to violence. And particularly when we are seeing young people sort of taking such drastic action, they are in fact putting their future on the line.
Now, earlier in the day, police said they were closing the book on one of the most violent chapters of the protest movement, the siege of the Hong Kong Polytechnic University. Police lifted their cordon around a Hong Kong university shortly before noon on Friday, finally ending the standoff with protesters that began almost 2 weeks ago. The sprawling red brick campus became a battleground on November 17 between police and protesters armed with bows and arrows, as well as Molotov cocktails. The standoff settled into a tense stalemate during which hundreds fled the campus, some making daring escapes, others caught and beaten by officers during failed breakouts, leaving a dwindling core of holdouts surrounded by police cordons. After university leaders said almost all protesters had left, police teams moved in on Thursday to gather more than 4,000 Molotov cocktails and other weapons left behind after the occupation.
Now the focus is mainly of the handling of the dangerous stuff, items, offensive weapons, and also to gather evidence. And our major concern is not about the arrest, but the well-being of people, if there are any, still remain inside. Yes, their personal safety, their well-being will be our concern.
1,801 pieces of petrol bomb, including 100 which is tied with the some cassette gas bottle, which is used to make the damage more extensively. And as for the chemical, we have totally seized about 558 bottles of different kind of chemical, including the strong acid, strong alkaline, corrosive liquids.
The university now faces a mammoth cleanup operation. Hong Kongers have protested in huge numbers over the last 6 months, fueled by years of growing fears that authoritarian China is stamping out the city's liberties. Violence spiraled as Beijing and local leaders refused major concessions, and the police were used to break up rallies on a daily basis. Arrests have skyrocketed in recent weeks. On Wednesday, Security Minister John Lee told lawmakers that some 5,800 people have been arrested since the protests first began in early June, with 923 charged so far. The arrests have ramped up in recent months. Beijing and Hong Kong leader Carrie Lam have argued that a silent majority still supports the establishment, but that narrative was smashed by district council elections on Sunday, which saw a landslide win for pro-democracy candidates. Meanwhile, China's foreign ministry said that those who are not welcomed will naturally not be allowed to enter China, as the editor-in-chief of a Chinese state media said that China is considering putting all the U.S. lawmakers who drafted the Hong Kong law on a no-entry list.
具体的回应，我能告诉你就是我们的立场，原则立场就是，签证问题是一国的主权，中国政府当然有权决定允许谁入境，不允许谁入境。那些不受欢迎的人，自然不会被允许入境。
The U.S. and Hong Kong have a tight trade and financial relationship that's largely built upon the city's trusted position as a relatively safe place to access China. Now, President Trump signed 2 bills on Wednesday pertaining to Hong Kong. One involves an annual review of the city's autonomy from China, and another bars the sale of munitions to Hong Kong police, such as tear gas and rubber bullets. The bill aims to check for possible erosion by the Chinese government of Hong Kong's high degree of autonomy under the one country, two systems principle. It would also allow for sanctions to be imposed on Chinese officials involved in suppressing Hong Kong. Several thousand protesters rallied in central Hong Kong to thank the United States after President Trump signed legislation supporting pro-democracy protesters in the city. Take a look. In other news, North Korea's leader Kim Jongun supervised Thursday's test of what it called a super large multiple launch rocket system. Pyongyang state media said on Friday, hinting that it could be the last in the series. Take a look. Pyongyang fired what Seoul described as unidentified projectiles on Thursday, the Thanksgiving holiday in the U.S., according to South Korean officials, as nuclear talks between the North and the United States remain deadlocked. Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe said the weapons were ballistic missiles, which represented serious defiance of the international community. Pyongyang is banned from such launches under UN Security Council sanctions over its nuclear and missiles program. Now, North Korea's KCNA news agency released pictures of a smiling Kim attending the launch wearing a black leather trench coat, being applauded by fur-hatted troops. The test, quote, aimed to finally examine the system's combat abilities and prove the military and technical superiority of the weapon system and its firm reliability, KCNA said, adding that Kim expressed great satisfaction. It was the fourth test of the Pyongyang super large system since August, and it has also fired other weapons in recent months as it seeks to up pressure on Washington. Nuclear negotiations between the U.S. and North Korea have been at a standstill since the Hanoi summit between President Trump and leader Kim Jong-un broke up in February, and Pyongyang has since demanded Washington change its approach by the end of the year. U.S. President Donald Trump made an unannounced trip to Afghanistan, serving turkey to troops in a cafeteria and meeting Afghan President Ashraf Ghani to celebrate the Thanksgiving holiday with U.S. troops at the Bagram Air Base outside the capital, Kabul.
The Taliban wants to make a deal, and we're meeting with them, and we're saying it has to be a ceasefire. They didn't want to do a ceasefire, but now they do want to do a ceasefire. I believe it probably work out that way, and we'll see what happens. But we've made tremendous progress, and we're going to stay until such time as we have a deal or we have total victory. And they want to make a deal very badly. So for a period of time, we've been wanting to make a deal, and so have the Taliban. Then we pulled back. We were getting close, and we pulled back. We didn't want to do it because of what they did.
Troops remain in Afghanistan 18 years after the U.S. invaded in the wake of the September 11, 2001 attacks. The U.S. earlier this year reached a deal with the Taliban insurgents to pull troops from the country and wind down America's longest war in return for security guarantees. But President Trump made a shock move in September, describing the year-long talks as dead and withdrawing an invitation to the insurgents to meet near Washington due to the killing of a U.S. soldier. The U.S. president has more recently suggested that negotiations could get underway again. The Taliban have refused to negotiate formally with the Afghan government, but diplomatic efforts continue to foster dialogue and plant the seeds of an eventual brokered peace deal. 49 people died and more than 5,000 have been displaced by the violent earthquake that pulverized homes in Albania this week, according to the Prime Minister in a tally of the damage on Friday. The 6.4 magnitude quake that jolted Albania before dawn on Tuesday was the most deadly and destructive in decades. Whole families were crushed by their homes while they were sleeping. The damage was most concentrated near the Adriatic coast in the port city of Durrës and the town of Thumain, where scores of people were trapped beneath the wreckage of toppled apartments and hotels. On Friday, the search effort wound down to focus on one or two sites in Durrës, including a collapsed beachside hotel. Prime Minister Eddie Rama said that 49 people lost their lives and more than 750 were injured. Around 45 people were rescued from the ruins alive by relief teams who were backed up by experts from around Europe with dogs, cameras, and other equipment to comb through the rubble. The cave fire remains at 3,126 acres and is now, according to authorities, 70% contained. Snow fell on Thanksgiving morning at the site of the cave fire that raged across 3,000 acres in Santa Barbara on Monday in scenes reminiscent of a fantasy movie. Public Information Officer Mike Eliasson with Santa Barbara County Fire Department tweeted a series of stark images showing light snowfall atop E Camino Cielo in Los Padres National Forest on Thanksgiving morning. The cave fire, which raged on Monday evening and into Tuesday morning, was still active in some areas, but it has so far caused no casualties. A rainstorm that occurred on Tuesday night and helped combat the fire and increase the containment of the burn area to 40% by Wednesday night. All evacuation orders and warnings and potential debris flow were canceled in time for people to be home for Thanksgiving. Two major winter storms are disrupting the travel plans of millions of Americans headed to Thanksgiving Day destinations on jam-packed highways and airplanes Wednesday. The so-called cave fire that started on Monday in Los Padres National Forest grew to nearly 4,300 acres overnight as it moved towards populated areas in the cities of Santa Barbara, Goleta, and nearby communities about a 2-hour drive north of Los Angeles. The cave fire also threatened Southern California Edison's main transmission lines that provide power to the southern portion of the county. Outages were reported in unincorporated areas between the cities of Goleta and Santa Barbara. Experts say that climate change is increasing the size, frequency, and risk of wildfires as weather changes have doubled the area that has been affected by natural fires in the western U.S. in recent years, according to a climate change fact sheet by the University of California, Santa Barbara. Eagle News, we'll be right back.
Visiting the Philippines, Manila or Quezon City is a popular destination. But oftentimes the hustle and bustle of the city can be more stressful on your vacation. So when you feel the need to reconnect to nature or relax again, there's a beautiful oasis just outside of the city called the Garden at Ciudad de Victoria. That you can see here include hydrangea, snapdragon, and stargazers. They're truly beautiful. The gardens at Ciudad de Victoria are so peaceful, tranquil, and beautiful that it's become a haven for young couples and a very popular venue for engagement photos. The next time you want an escape from the big city, the garden at Ciudad de Victoria is a wonderful place to visit.
A notorious militia killed a total of 27 people in a massacre in Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo, police said, updating the death toll. The victims were hacked to death with machetes in Oicha, about 30 kilometers from the city of Beni, according to a local official. The police tweeted on Thursday that there were 27 bodies in the morgue at Oicha, taking to 107 the number of people killed in and around Beni since November 5. The vast majority of the killings have been carried out by the Allied Democratic Forces, or ADF, a militia that has plagued eastern DR Congo since the 1990s. The massacres have sparked protests against the local UN peacekeeping mission known by its French acronym MONUSCO. On Thursday, the envoys of Britain, Canada, Switzerland, and the US wrote a joint letter condemning the attacks against MONUSCO. The envoys expressed full backing for the UN Secretary-General's special representative in these difficult times. The armed groups operating in this region must be dismantled, they said. The European Union's representative, meanwhile, gave full support to the Congolese army and UN troops in its fight against the ADF. Angry residents torched the town hall and the UN compound in the city of Beni in North Kivu, protesting what they saw as the failure by government forces and peacekeepers to prevent a deadly weekend attack by the Allied Democratic Forces, or ADF, rebel group, according to media reports. Now, Leila Zerougi, head of the UN mission, known by the French acronym MONUSCO, spoke to journalists in New York after briefing the UN Security Council behind closed doors on what she described as the very disturbing situation.
What is happening in Beni is, of course, very disturbing. We are facing challenges that it's very hard for a mission to deal with, because you have demonstration from people that are frustrated with attacks from armed groups. This area is the area affected by Ebola. This area went through hell for the last 20 years, so the population paid a very high price. You remember when we started the Ebola, it was also, we faced a lot of resistance from the population and attacks, and we have a doctor that was killed. So this is something that we know and we try to deal with and to address. It's a forest area, not easy to access, and population is living in many areas, many villages. Not easy to protect every person. We have a responsibility to protect. We have a responsibility to work with the FRDC and try to make sure that these operations will not have the impact that they are having now. But it's not always easy to achieve results. Of course, when you put in a mandate that you have an offensive mandate, then people expect you to finish the enemy. But it's not easy to finish the enemy, because you are dealing with a terrorist group using a subversive and terrorist tactic, attacking civilians in the middle of the night.
Now, Beni is a key base for the UN and DRC government efforts to tackle the more than year-long Ebola outbreak in the eastern region, which has seen nearly 3,000 deaths since August 2018. Around 16,000 blue helmets serve with MONUSCO. There are 557 UN peacekeepers from Malawi in Beni, together with a formed police unit from India with around 150 officers, while 150 Tanzanian peacekeepers are stationed at the airport there. Meanwhile, WHO Director-General Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus spoke after 4 Ebola workers were killed in Eastern Democratic Republic of the Congo. On November 4, the authorities said more than 300 attacks on Ebola health workers had been recorded since the start of the year, leaving 6 dead and 70 more wounded. Some of them are patients.
Last night, 2 attacks in Eastern Democratic Republic of the Congo killed 4 workers responding to the Ebola outbreak. The attacks occurred overnight on a shared living camp in Biakato Mines and an Ebola response coordination office in Mangina. We're heartbroken that people have died in the line of duty as they work to save others. The world has lost brave professionals. These constant attacks must stop. As you know, Ebola was retreating. In the last week, there were 7 cases of Ebola, down from a peak of over 120 per week in April 2019. Any interruption to the response could lead to a resurgence in the outbreak, and more people will die as a consequence.
An outbreak of the much-feared hemorrhagic virus has killed 2,199 in North and South Kivu and Ituri provinces since August 1, 2018, according to the latest official figures. It's the Democratic Republic of Congo's 10th Ebola epidemic and the second deadliest on record after an outbreak that struck West Africa in 2014 to 2016, claiming more than 11,300 lives. Insecurity has complicated the epidemic from the outset, compounding resistance within communities to preventative measures, care facilities, and safe burials. On November 4, the authorities said more than 300 attacks on Ebola health workers had been recorded since the start of the year. Iraq's protest-hit city saw one of their bloodiest days yet, as a government crackdown killed nearly 40 demonstrators following the dramatic torching of an Iranian consulate. The country's capital and south have been rocked by the worst street unrest since the 2003 U.S.-led invasion that toppled Saddam Hussein, with a protest movement venting fury at the government and its backers in neighboring Iran. Thursday's violence brought the total death toll since early October to more than 300, with more than 15,000 wounded, according to an AFP tally. The highest toll was in the flashpoint southern city of Nasiriyah, where 25 people were killed when security forces used excessive force to break up rallies, according to the Iraqi Human Rights Commission. Medics in Nasiriyah said they had to carry out more than 80 life-saving surgeries in hospitals crowded with casualties. Protesters have accused the ruling elite of embezzling state funds desperately needed to restore failing public services and fix schools. Corruption is rampant in Iraq, ranked the world's 12th most graft-ridden country by Transparency International. The World Bank said 1 in 5 Iraqis lives in poverty, and youth unemployment stands at 25%. To Colombia now, where hundreds of people in northern Bogota hit the streets playing drums to protest against the government of right-wing President Ivan Duque. Public transport was largely shut down and shops and offices closed in the center of the capital as a series of protests that began with a 250,000-strong march last Thursday continued for a 7th consecutive day. U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo voiced steadfast support for Duque's government in a phone call to the beleaguered president on Wednesday, according to the State Department. Mr. Pompeo welcomed the national conversation that President Duque has convened in Colombia in response to recent demonstrations. It said a Gallup poll published on November 7 showed President Duque's approval ratings at 26% in October, the lowest since he took office in August of 2018, while 70% of respondents believe the country is heading in the wrong direction. The National Strike Committee, which groups unions, students, universities, university lecturers, and indigenous groups, presented a list of 13 demands to the government. They include the withdrawal of Duque's proposed tax reforms and full compliance with the 2016 peace deal with FARC guerrillas. To Chile now, where victims who paid with their eyes the price of violent repression during clashes In Santiago, protests in front of the government's presidential palace, while the country's police force, or carabineros, are under scrutiny over various human rights violations. Take a look.
Perdí la visión total y recién el jueves pasado me pudieron sacar el balín. Ahora tengo que, también me sacaron el ojo y voy a tener que ocupar una prótesis. Eso para toda la vida.
University student Gustavo Gatica became the first demonstrator to be left fully blind after being hit in the eyes by pellets fired by riot police on November 8 during a protest in Santiago, and Gatica's eyes has become a symbol among the more than 200 demonstrators who have suffered eye injuries, often resulting in being blinded in one eye from rubber bullets and pellets fired by riot police. Residents in some towns displayed their anger by banging on pots and pans. Human Rights Watch, which on Tuesday accused the police of serious human rights violations, said it had received hundreds of reports of abuses, including beatings and sexual assault. The city's metro system is still recovering from attacks on October 18, when a hike in metro fares set off the violent protests against the government of President Sebastián Piñera. In other news, South Korean singer-songwriter Jung Joonyoung was convicted on Friday of gang rape and distributing videos of the assaults and other sexual encounters, and was jailed for 6 years in a scandal that has rocked K-pop. Jung and Choi Jong-hoon, a former member of boy band FT Island, were found guilty of gang raping 2 different victims on 2 occasions in 2016. Separately, 30-year-old Jung was also convicted of filming himself having sex with other women without their knowledge and sharing the footage without their consent. It is the highest profile example of an epidemic of spy cam crimes in South Korea, which have prompted widespread anger and seen women demonstrating in Seoul. Now, Jung distributed his videos in mobile chat rooms with recipients, including fellow K-pop star Seungri of Big Bang, who has been accused of illegal gambling in connection with a sex and drug scandal. Jung rose to fame in 2014 when he came third in the audition show Superstar K and had a number of solo hits before the video scandal broke in March when he announced his retirement. At the time, the rape accusations had yet to emerge, but he said he had committed crimes that cannot be forgiven. There was no immediate statement from his lawyers or his record company Friday. Known as Molka, South Korean spy cam videos are largely made by men secretly filming women in schools, toilets, and elsewhere. To Malta now, where Prime Minister Joseph Muscat said that the main suspect in the 2017 killing of investigative journalist Daphne Caruana Galizia would not be granted immunity to disclose what he knows about the case. After an emergency cabinet meeting that dragged on for more than 6 hours through the night, Prime Minister Muscat told reporters the decision to deny an immunity request for suspect Jorgen Fenech followed the recommendations of the Attorney General and Police Commissioner. An intensifying probe into the murder of Caruana Galizia, who was blown up by a car bomb in October 17, has destabilized Muscat's government. This week, 2 ministers and Chief of Staff, Keith Schembri, have stepped down from their posts. Daphne Caruana Galizia was killed by a car bomb in October 2017. She had been reporting on political corruption for 30 years, including alleged money stashing by relatives of the Prime Minister. It shocked the country and sparked protests for justice. On a lighter note, the Iglesia Ni Cristo held a tribute to the OFWs in Thailand. We have a report coming in from our EBC Thailand Bureau, Mark Odanga.
A tribute to overseas Filipino workers was conducted in Rayong, province of Thailand, which was led by the members of religious organization Iglesia Ni Cristo or Church of Christ, and in cooperation with Felix Y. Manalo Foundation. Thailand is one of the tourist destinations known for its beautiful beaches and much laid-back vibes, compared to its nearby city, Pattaya. Members of Iglesia ni Cristo from Metro Bangkok area traveled approximately 3 to 4 hours to make this activity possible, while members from Pattaya, Sriracha, and Chonburi areas also participated willingly and invited their friends, colleagues, and loved ones in this event. An evangelical mission was also conducted to introduce the Church of Christ and its social civic activities like this that is being done around the world. Free food, entertainment, and goodie bags were given to all attendees. Smiles and laughter filled the venue as they watched the entertainers who traveled all the way from Bangkok.
Isang buwan po naming pinaghahandaan po ito. Unang-una po ay nagpapanata po kami gabi-gabi. At pangalawa po ay nagbigay po kami ng mga invitation letters po sa mga OFW natin dito sa Thailand.
สวัสดีค่ะ I'm Sister Choi Suwarnahong, or you can call me Sister Tao. We are preparing this event. Okay. The first as we set our devotional prayer every night, and then we also helping each other to invite our friend, our co-worker, and our loved one. After that, we have to decorate this place. You see, the place is so beautiful, right? And then also we have to pack all the thing and also everything that we needed in this gathering, so that we so hope that this gathering will help to our friend, our loved one to be joined in the Church of Christ. Okay, and we would like to thank you to Brother Eduardo Vibanalo because of his love, so that we can make this activity, and we do hope that God will bless each one of us. Yeah, we love you, Pa.
Good afternoon. I was invited by Ate Gina, and I was really motivated to come here to know about the Word, and I want to be enlightened about the teachings of Iglesia ni Cristo. And with the insights, I'm also looking forward to come back and listen more about the teachings. Thank you.
The members of the Iglesia ni Cristo, or the Church of Christ here in the Ecclesiastical District of Thailand, are one with Brother Eduardo Vimanalo, and will always be one with all the projects and activities that they're launching in the Church of Christ, like what we had today here in this part of Thailand, that members of the Church of Christ gathered together with our visitors and our invited guests to listen to the teachings of the Church of Christ, that we want all people to know, especially the importance of becoming members of the Iglesia ni Cristo. Not only that, we members of the Church of Christ are concerned for the welfare of their soul. Also, the Church of Christ is also concerned for what these people need in this life. That's why we're able to distribute parcel goods or goodie bags for all our invited guests today. And the members of the Church of Christ, through the leadership of the ministers, along with the church officers, will continue to do this, because we want to help Brother Eduardo Vimanalo, helping all the overseas Filipino workers around the world. We want to thank Brother Eduardo Vimanalo for leading the entirety of the church in this campaign wherever we are, and we will always be one with him as long as we live.
With the aim to reach far-flung areas, the church administration of the Iglesia ni Cristo continuously organized this kind of activity to show appreciation to our modern-day heroes. They didn't mind traveling long hours just to witness this event and to show how they care to their fellow men. Reporting from Tribute to OFWs here in Rayong, Thailand, I am Mark Odanga. I am one with 25.
Thank you, Mark. We'll be back with more news right after this break.
Tungkulin ng MTRCB ang mag-provide na appropriate ratings sa
Low-cost carrier Hong Kong Airlines said it will delay salary payments to some staff, warning its business has been severely affected by the political unrest in the city. Nearly 6 months of protests in the international finance hub have dealt its tourism sector a massive blow, and airlines serving the city have struggled. It said November salaries for all staff except cabin crew and overseas employees would now be delayed until December 6, but insisted the one-off salary arrangement does not impact our daily operation. Hong Kong Airlines is owned by struggling Chinese conglomerate HNA Group, which has been looking to lower its debt burden. The tourism industry in Hong Kong has been battered by nearly 6 months of pro-democracy protests that have become increasingly violent, with the rivals falling by half. The crisis comes as the economy was already feeling pressure from the China-US trade war, plunging into recession during the third quarter. Meanwhile, Lufthansa Technik Philippines, or LTP, held a groundbreaking ceremony of a new hangar to be called Hangar 1A at its hub in Pasay City. The creation of Hangar 1A would increase LTP's capacity by 20% and would also result in employment of additional 300 technicians, LTP President Elma Latter said in a briefing. He said currently LTP could service 7 aircrafts at the same time. With the new hangar, Latter is expecting LTP could now accommodate 10 aircraft at a time. He added this new hangar has a multi-purpose style and could accommodate both small and wide-booted aircraft. He also said $40 million was allotted for LTP's expansion, adding construction of a Hangar 1A started in September and is now expected to be operational by the last quarter of 2020. After years of political turmoil, the Lebanese economy is in a sharp downturn. Banks have restricted access to dollars while prices have risen. And amid the crisis, thousands of Lebanese say their jobs are under threat.
او الاتجاه الاول ان يسكر، اعطيهم حقوقهم لهالموظفين، قول لهم الله معكم. طبعا بيكون هذا موضوع كتير كتير بيعز علي، يعني بكون انا كل شيء بنيته هالسنين عم ينهار قدامي.
Luxury automaker Daimler said it was scrapping thousands of jobs to help fund the switch to electric vehicles in the latest layoffs to hit the stuttering German car industry. The Mercedes-Benz maker said it wanted to save 1.4 billion euros in staff costs as it joins rivals in investing billions in the greener, smarter cars of the future. Along with other manufacturers, Daimler is scrambling to get ready for tough new EU emission rules taking effect next year, forcing it to accelerate the costly shift to zero emissions, electric cars, and plug-in hybrids. The group, which employs 304,000 people globally, said the job cuts would be achieved through natural turnover, early retirement schemes, and severance packages. Daimler's announcement comes as the mighty German car industry is buffeted by trade tensions, weaker Chinese demand, and a darkening economic outlook. And Europe will become more assertive on the world stage. The new head of the European Council, Charles Michel, vowed Friday as he took over from Donald Tusk. They staged a formal handover of the job in a ceremony featuring the symbolic ringing of a bell that Tusk handed over to Michel in front of EU staff and reporters. It was part of a wider transition in Brussels that will, from next week, also see a new European Commission, the EU's executive arm, take charge under Ursula von der Leyen. The European Council President is tasked with representing the national leaders of EU member states who have final say over much of the bloc's business and also chairing their regular summits. Michel, a 43-year-old former Prime Minister of Belgium, hailed Tusk and his focus on maintaining European unity over the past 5 years as it weathered Brexit, a migration crisis, attacks by jihadists in several EU states, and financial tribulations. Singapore authorities ordered Facebook to correct an article on a fringe news site containing scurrilous accusations of election rigging, ramping up their use of a controversial law against misinformation. On Thursday, authorities ordered Alex Tan, who runs anti-government website The Straits Times Review, to put up a correction next to a November 23 post on elections. But Tan, who is based overseas, refused, saying he is an Australian citizen and would not comply with requests from a foreign government. A body overseeing the law then said it had ordered Facebook to put up a correction notice by the article, which would link to a statement on the government's own fact-checking site. Now, that statement said that Tan's article, which claims elections are rigged in Singapore to ensure the ruling party stays in power, contained, quote, false statements of fact and made scurrilous accusations. Facebook has previously said it was concerned with aspects of the new law which grant broad powers to the Singapore executive branch to compel U.S. to remove content they deem to be false and to push a government notification to users. Rights groups such as New York-based Human Rights Watch have also warned the law could undermine internet freedoms, not just in Singapore, but elsewhere in Southeast Asia. Singapore used the law for the first time Monday, ordering opposition party member Brad Boyer to correct a Facebook post authorities said could smear the reputation of two state investment funds. Boyer, a naturalized Singapore citizen originally from Britain, immediately complied. The penalties prescribed range from prison terms of as much as 10 years or fines of up to 1 million Singapore dollars. Singapore, ruled by the People's Action Party since independence in 1965, is widely expected to hold a general election within months, though no official date has yet been set. Let's now go to environment news. Protesters in smoke-covered Sydney kicked off a fresh round of global demonstrations against climate change on Friday, with activists and school children picketing the headquarters of bushfire-ravaged Australia's ruling party. Hundreds of people gathered outside the offices of the Conservative Liberal Party as protesters in several Asia-Pacific cities heeded the call to action from 16-year-old climate change campaigner Greta Thunberg. The protests have taken on extra urgency in Australia. The country's southeast has been devastated by hundreds of damaging bushfires in recent weeks, and 6 people have already died and hundreds of homes have been destroyed in the crisis, which scientists say has been worsened by rising temperatures. Drought and unseasonably hot, dry and windy conditions have fueled the unprecedented blazes. The target of the protesters' ire was Prime Minister Scott Morrison, who has angrily denied any link between the fires and climate change.
I am learning so much more here today in one day of the strike than I would learn missing my maths class, one class of literature. I can catch up, that's fine, but it is so important that we are all here showing solidarity, showing support.
Earlier this year, my hometown was on the front lines of the Bunyip bushfires, and I guess that kind of shocked me into realizing that this is something that is happening and it's time I do something about it.
I'm here because I'm so terrified about the fact that the government is doing nothing when there are fires going on in the rest of Australia and people are dying, but the government still has no care and is still continuing to deny climate change. And so we have to come out here and strike to show the government that this is such an important issue and that we need fast action and we need it now.
While hundreds of demonstrators, including many young people, joined a fresh round of global protests against climate change, with activists and school children shouting slogans, "Let's change ourselves, not the climate." Take a look. This is in Japan.
もともととても参加したくて、グレタさんの行動にすごく影響を受けていて、でインスタグラムで今回フライデーズ・フォー・フューチャーの気候マーチをやるということを見つけて、でぜひと思って来ました。今行動しないとこれから一歩先行くともう手遅れになってしまうので、その前に自分ができることをしたいと思って来ました。
私はその自然災害とかそういう台風とかもそうですけど、そういうのがものすごく怖くて、それがものすごく毎日すごく感じていて、でも今だなっていうのがもう頭でずっとあって、なのでここに来ました。
僕ら若者はもう生まれた時からそういった問題に触れてきているので、そこを若者だけじゃなくて全員で取り組んでいかなきゃいけない問題だと思うので、みんなで取り組めたらいいかなというふうに思っています。
The action in Tokyo is part of protests in several Asia-Pacific cities, heeded the call to action from 16-year-old climate change campaigner Greta Thunberg. The latest demonstrations come as 200 nations prepare to gather in Madrid next week for a 12-day UN climate conference. The meeting will focus largely on finalizing the rule book for the 2015 Paris Climate Treaty, which becomes operational in 2021. Scientists have warned that efforts to cap warming to 1.5 Celsius are failing and that carbon emissions, which are on the rise, would need to fall 7.6% a year to meet the target. And the UN has already reported that greenhouse gas levels in the atmosphere, the main driver of climate change, had already hit a record high last year. The organization has also warned that global temperatures are on pace to rise almost 4 Celsius by the end of the century, an increase that could make some places virtually uninhabitable.
What do we want? Climate justice!
And that's all the time we have for you tonight. That's the news for tonight. Join us online and here again tomorrow evening from all of us here at Eagle News. I'm Alma Angeles, always one with 25. Good night.